Have you ever noticed that the more we have, the more we think we need? It's like some sort of wacky trick that the universe plays on us. Get the house, then you need the furniture. Get the furniture, then you need to update the aesthetic, right? Get the right aesthetic, and suddenly your life feels cluttered. Joshua Becker calls this the prosperity paradox. The idea that as our wealth grows, so does our perceived need for more of it. And if anyone understands the pull of more, it's my guest today, Joshua Becker. He was on his way to a normal stuff-filled life when one moment things changed. He realized, I own all this stuff, but does any of it actually make my life better? So he started getting rid of things, not a decluttering for the weekend kind of way, but in the way that fundamentally changed how he saw his possessions, money, and even his very purpose. Now millions of people turn to Joshua to learn more about how they can own less and live more. Joshua's got a gift for making minimalism feel less like deprivation and more like freedom. And one of the things he said in this conversation that has had me thinking was this: the greatest danger of wealth is that we don't realize when we have it. This one really made me rethink my own relationship to money, and I believe it will do the same for you. So without further ado, let's jump into my conversation with Joshua Becker. It's interesting to me that I don't think in fact, I know it's not an overstatement to say that your work has inspired millions of people to think differently about possessions, and certainly differently even about money. And so that's kind of what I wanted to explore today. And
Okay.
it's interesting because you've said so much about it. One of my goals is to get to some stuff that I hope you haven't said, right? Like I'd like to really understand a bit more about what money means to you. So I'd kind of like to start there. Um, Joshua, why is money important to you?
Well, that is an interesting question right off the bat. I think money is essential. Um, I personally don't want money to be more important to me than it actually is or should be. Um, I hope I live a life that doesn't make the case that the money is even among the list of most important things for me. That being
Hmm.
said, money, I mean, at a very basic level, money's there to trade goods. And so I do my work for money, and money provides for my family, and money provides for employees and provides for opportunity. And so there's certainly importance in it. But yeah, I've never wanted it to be something that was too important to me.
Yeah. Tell me more about the word essential. That's the very first word you said. Like it's interesting to me that money is this thing that we say, like, I don't want it to be too important, and it's essential. Like, tell me more about that.
Well, again, at very basic level, money is a tool to expedite trade. So rather than me taking chickens to the market to trade it for a haircut, I just take money. I sell my chickens for the money, which I then trade for the haircut. And so it's there to, uh, provide shelter and buy clothes and education and transportation. So that's why I mean essential.
If it's not among the top things that are important to you, what are the top things?
Three things I'd say: faith, family, and faith relationships, which includes family, and making a difference in the world. Um, those are the three things
Yeah.
that are most important to me, and really the other two flow from the top one. More than anything, my relationship with God is the most important thing about me. Number two, I want to love the people in my life. I want to be a faithful
Yeah.
husband. I want to be an intentional father. I want to serve the people, both friends and strangers in my life. And then number three, I want to live my life to the best potential that I can. I say I want to bring about the greatest good for the greatest number of people in my life. And so those are the three most important things to me.
Mm.
And I mean, I guess it's safe to say that money interacts with all of those, but um, even in my book, Things That Matter, I think that one of the points I was trying to make is when money becomes the goal,
Mm.
it can become at the expense of those three things.
Mm.
And I think that's when it becomes a problem.
Then do you see money as a tool to make those three things possible?
Um, I mean, to some extent, although no. I mean, some money without a lot of money. I think that you can, uh,
Mm.
love the
Mm.
people in your life without having a lot of money or even a middle class amount of money. Um, Impact, I suppose that's where there's probably the most
Mm.
direct intersection and connection. Money certainly provides some
Mm.
opportunity and amplification. But the way I phrase it, I want to bring about the greatest good for the greatest number of people. Like that's going to look very different for a mom or school teacher or a writer or someone living in a developing nation. Someone lives surrounded by
Mm.
technology. So I
Mm.
think even that goal for myself and for other people doesn't necessarily require certainly doesn't require a lot of money to do that. I think we
Mm.
can all live that out.
Mm. That's such an interesting it's something I think a lot about. Like, does money could so like if enough if having enough is a number, and you've talked about this, if having enough is a number, the number will always move, right? Like we'll always want a little bit more. Um, so enough clearly can't be a number. I don't even think it can really be a destination. It's like more of something that you become. But then the question I'm interested in is like, does money create the conditions under which enoughness is easier? And I immediately think of like I know so many people with more money than they'll ever need that don't have enough. And I know plenty of people who have almost nothing and seem to have enough. And so there's a just really interesting paradox in there because we all seem to believe that money can create the very least, if we don't believe money will make happiness, which most of us operate at least as if we believe that. But at the very least, we believe that, man, it certainly would be enough to be more self actualized, more focused on God, more focused on family, if I had just a little bit more. How do you think about that paradox, that problem, that tension?
The greatest danger of wealth is that we don't realize when we have it. It's interesting that you use the word paradox because I actually refer to it as the prosperity paradox. That the more money we have, the more money we think we need. And I'm trying to remember if I know all three of the instances, but the studies are there. Um, how much, when asked the question, how much money do you need to retire? The more money a person has, the higher they answer that question.
Right.
When asked, how much of a raise do you need to be happy? The more income you have coming in, the larger the raise you say you need in order to find happiness with your income. And then there's a third one, which is slipping my mind. Oh, I think it's just like those who define themselves as rich. Um, there's so much we talk about the 1% and we talk about the 10%. And I always think it's fascinating because most Americans are in the top 5% of the world. But, we just think of our culture and we think of everyone else who has more than us, as opposed to seeing how in
Right.
America we have way more than most people do around the world. So, like, just three examples where the more we have, the more we think we need. Um, and I, like my views of money have been so shaped by
Huh.
uh, trips to developing nations and spending time with people and like building homes and spending time in a one room home in San Salvador with a mom and her two children, um, and perfectly happy, like perfectly content, um, probably even
Mm,
more joyful, I think, than a lot of
mhm,
Americans. And
mm.
seeing that, and then seeing Americans, I don't know how you can't help but wonder, like, what are the negative effects that money is having on us? And it's never a popular conversation. People don't invite me to
Yeah.
parties to talk about the dangers of wealth because we tend to just think of it always as being good. But from what I've seen, I don't think it always brings good things into our lives, and um, sometimes it just blinds us to the fact that we keep thinking that we need more and more constantly.
No, I mean, I think it's settled doctrine at this point if we just read the studies, like it but culturally, it's really, you know, yeah, no fun to talk about culturally because but it's so interesting that we've lost the plot to that degree, that it's countercultural to have this discussion. It's provocative.
Yeah. Or defenses come up really quick. Well, that's easy for you to say
Yeah,
because
yeah, for
you
sure. It's
have
easy for you
enough.
to say.
Or, well, what about this situation? Or what about that situation? And it's true. I mean, it's true to an extent. Zig Ziglar said, "Money won't make you happy, but everyone wants to find out for themselves." And I
Yeah.
think that's true. I always one of the quotes that I post most often on Facebook that gets the most pushback is it's attributed to Jim Carrey. I assume it is.
I'm glad,
He
yeah.
says, "I wish everybody could get rich and famous so that they could discover it's not the answer."
Yeah,
And people get so upset. Well, that's easy for him to say because he has all the
yeah,
the money that you
yeah.
would possibly need. And my pushback is always, well, don't you need someone who's arrived at money and fame to tell you that it's not the answer? Like,
Right,
who else
right,
is going to tell you other than someone who's experienced it and can tell you
right.
I'm not any happier now that I have more money? But everyone wants to find out for themselves, I think.
Yeah. I think it's so interesting that almost all of the wisdom traditions point at the same thing, right? Like almost all of them, and then somehow we've lost this modern plot. Joshua, I'd be curious. I've never actually heard what's your earliest memory of money?
Oh, my earliest memory of money, I wanted to be a stockbroker. When I was
That's
when I
your
was a
earliest
kid.
memory?
Oh yeah, yeah. I invented a game. I can remember it vividly. It must have been fifth or sixth grade. I invented a stock market game. None of the neighborhood kids wanted to play it with me very
You've
long,
been
but
you've been
um,
popular for a long time.
but yeah, had Monopoly money and like the Life board game used to have like a cardboard thing 1 through 12, and so people would kind of invest their money in a number and we'd roll the dice and then they could try to make money. I want to be a stock analyst, or I want to give multi-million dollar loans to corporations. Those were my when I went to college, that's what I wanted to do. And then I became a pastor.
That's of course. That's really your first memory.
Well, if I were to go like earlier, I
Yeah.
suppose my very first memory about money would be we went to church every Sunday, and my parents gave us 2 quarters, one to give in the offering plate and one to keep. And I don't know how long that was done. For all I know, it was just done for like 2 or 3 months, and then they forgot to keep doing it. But yeah, that's probably my very first
Wow.
memory about money. Yeah.
What was it like growing up in your house? Like, do you remember your parents talking about money or
No, no, not a
interesting,
lot.
right? Yeah.
My dad was a banker, and my
Wow.
mom stayed at home. Like ag lending in South Dakota, there wasn't a lot of money in it. I've since heard stories about
Mm.
we there were they had 3 babies all within 367 days. Me and my
Wow.
brother, and then my sister was born 2 days, 367 days later. So there were three of us under
Wow.
basically under the age of one. Um, and I think there were some pretty dicey moments in terms of um,
Yeah.
providing for the family, but I wouldn't have known those until much later. So it was
Interesting.
always, I don't know, lower middle class. We never missed a meal, but never were
Yeah.
eating at the fanciest steakhouse in town either.
Do you ever remember in, I don't know, junior high, high school, when you went off to college, like, do you ever remember your first interaction where you're like, whoa, like they treat money differently than I do? Do you remember having an experience like that where you became aware of how others treated money?
Well, growing up, my brother and I treated money very differently. My twin brother. So I was always a saver and he was always a spender.
Wow.
Um, he was also always far more generous with his money
Huh.
than I was growing up. So it wasn't always just spending money on his own things, but paying for his friends to go out for dinner or whatever. And I was not going out for dinner at all, like because I
Right.
didn't want to spend the money. So yeah, even seeing my brother interact differently with money.
Yeah. That's interesting. I don't know that I've ever had a conversation with a twin about money. Has that played out in any other ways that are interesting to you?
He so after college, I did not go become a stockbroker. I became a pastor. And then he quickly became part owner of a bricklaying business in South Dakota. And so I would say by our late 20s, he was making really good money and we were just scraping by as a youth pastor. And so even then, like he was spending money on things that I've even to this day never been able to afford. Um,
Yeah.
but again, I think he's very generous, and has
Yeah.
been, and so yeah, that's kind of played itself out even interesting.
Yeah.
So
I just think it's so interesting how we all like there's a million ways to approach this. And I'm increasingly convinced that everybody's doing the best they can with the knowledge they have. But even when people are doing it well, quote unquote, whatever well means, those priorities can be completely different and they're all okay. So it's just interesting to see two people raised in the same household at the same time have two different ways of approaching things and both are fine, right?
yeah, yeah, I don't think everyone ends up fine.
No,
I
but
think
I
there's a
do
lot
think
of well, my theory, it was interesting when you said, I think a lot of people, I think most people are doing the best that they can, or something that you said, and I'm like, I don't know. Like, there's a lot of people living paycheck to paycheck that I don't think should be, and a
let's
lot of
talk.
people who don't have any money in savings that I think need to. I think it's very. I think there's a lot of unintentional spending that's taking place, but that might be a helpful,
Yeah, no,
interesting
no, it's an important
conversation.
topic because that's what I'm saying is I think everybody I am increasingly convinced, and I could be talked out, and I'm sure I'm wrong, but I'm increasingly convinced. Often wrong, never in doubt.
Aren't we
About
all?
the idea that everybody is doing the best they can with the information and the ability they have at the time. That it's really easy to look at somebody else and go, I can't believe the crazy decisions they're making with money. And I got to go through this myself, right? Made a very public mistake about housing. And I was fascinated by how much people seem to know about the decision-making process that I must have gone through that didn't match
Mm.
at all the reality. And that lesson really led me to like the less judgment and less shame and less blame of like, let me give you an example. I have a friend who's years ago had this experience. He's a dentist and he was spending money that I could not believe, knowing his financial situation because I was his financial planner. And one day I confronted him on it. And he was like, I mean, I'll give you an example, and this is going to sound outrageous, like a helicopter ski trip. And he helped me understand that at that moment, that trip was keeping him, essentially, he said a lot. Like it was so important to me to go get this break. I realize it doesn't make sense, but it makes sense in this context. So I don't think that necessarily gives us permission to not be responsible for our decisions, but it may, hopefully we can all have a little more grace for the decisions other people are making because we don't know exactly what's going on. Is that more clarifying? You may not agree, but does that make more sense?
Oh, yeah. Yes. And your caveat of doing the best they can with the information that they have
At the
at the
time, yeah.
moment.
Yeah.
Um, so how well do you think people know where their money is even going? I'm just becoming more and more convinced that money is like this nebulous, like there are dollars and there are cents, and my credit card tells me what I'm spending like it gives me the report at the end of the
Yeah.
year.
Yeah.
Um, but I don't even know if I know where most of my money is going or how much money is coming in. Like it just is kind of flowing in and out all the time. And um, I don't know. I feel like there's a piece of unintentionality. Like I see it in possess. That's how I describe my minimalist journey. When we started getting rid of things, physical possessions out of my home, I was like, how did all of this happen? Like, how did I have three minivan loads full of things in my home that I didn't need? And I just went back to it was just very unintentional living that I didn't need the stuff, but I bought it because it was on sale, because everyone else was buying it, whatever it might have been. Like I just wasn't taking control and being clear on what I needed, and not going above and beyond that. Um, Even though I guess I would think that I knew better. Like I didn't need. I hadn't been interested. I hadn't been introduced to minimalism, but I certainly didn't need as much
Yeah.
stuff as I had been
Yeah.
acquiring. And so, my one question with your what they how does that factor in to your viewpoint at all? Is there space
Yeah.
for they're doing the best they can with the information that they have, but there's still a sense of, hey, we don't even know what we're buying, and we don't
For
need to be
sure.
spending our money on these things.
No,
But I don't
I think for sure most people don't know. Every single person I've ever taken through the experience of tracking for 90 days comes back to me shocked. Every time I do it, I'm shocked. Our ability to fool ourselves is, one of our greatest talents, right? And so like the helicopter ski trip was just a cute story, right? Of fooling ourselves. I'm completely aware of that. And like every mistake I've ever made, same thing. But I think I would add like everybody's doing the best they can with the information and the skill
mm,
they have at the time. Now, then let's add one thing to it. It's not particularly complicated to figure out where your money's going. And most people don't do it.
mhm,
So there's something super interesting there. And I think it's because we are hardwired to avoid inauthentic behavior. There's something about how we spend and I think of this as like my definition of real financial planning is the alignment. It's a Venn diagram, like the alignment of your use of capital, and capital has an asterisk, four sources: money, energy, time, and attention. So your alignment of your how you spend your money, energy, time, and attention with what's important to you. All of every part of that is hard. Like figuring out what's important to you because we got so much momentum. Like it used to be easy. You growing up in South Dakota, it was pretty easy to know because all you compared, your comparison set was your neighbors, and you might have wanted a
Mhm.
slightly better bike, but you didn't know you were supposed to want a private jet. So like figuring out what's important to you has gotten really hard. It takes quiet. Well, none of us have any of that. Like there,
Mhm.
then if we do have a guess of what's important to us, and then we take the time to look at how we spend our money, energy, time, and attention, there's almost always a gap. That gap's really painful. I'm going to avoid it.
Mhm. You're right, man. I mean, this is what I this is what I talk about. Like this is what I love. Like I identically like what is important to us. Where are we spending our time and money and energy and attention? And then it's when we live in alignment. I have two thoughts. Number one, there is a pull. The world hijacks our passions is the way I say it. And so
Hmm. Hmm.
we have what's important to us, we have where our money, time, and energy goes. And like there's another force that's like pulling things out of that Venn diagram, like trying to keep it out of that sweet
Overlap.
spot and redirecting our money and time and attention to whatever they want our money, time, and attention directed towards.
Yeah.
So there's that aspect of it. The second part of it is I'm convinced that the more we live in that alignment, the less we struggle with envy and jealousy
Hmm.
and wanting more and wanting to be someone different that we are. If we know our money is going towards the things that matter for us, then it doesn't matter that my neighbor bought a brand new boat. Like it's okay that he bought a boat
Right.
because I know I'm giving my money to this charity that is important to me. And so it's okay because my money went to somewhere where it needed to go. If my energy and my talents are being focused on things that matter to me, there might be some financial compensation that comes from that. But if there isn't as much financial compensation as my other neighbor down the street, it becomes okay that that person has
Right.
more money because I know I'm living in my
Hmm.
virtues and I'm living towards my purpose and I'm living towards my passion and I'm finding my fulfillment and my significance and my happiness and even in some ways I'm finding my security in knowing that I'm living my life
Hmm.
um, inside that diagram. And so just like from the very beginning conversation, like how important is money to you and what does enough look like? I think the more we square our finite resources with our truest passions, the easier it
Mm.
is to find, hey, I do have enough.
Yeah.
I'm providing for my family and I'm living a fulfilling life. What more could I possibly ask for?
Yeah. We'll be right back with more from 50 Fires. Welcome back to 50 Fires. I want to ask you about three in our research, which was not hard to do with you in terms of finding things you have said about money, right? I wanted to ask you about three things. We called these Joshua's three most provocative opinions.
Uh,
And I'm not what's
I
interesting to
look
me
forward to
is
hearing them.
yeah, we named them all, so you're free to use these names. But what's interesting is they're not like it's so fascinating to me that I agree with all of the. They're not provocative. They're sorry, they're like common sense and therefore provocative. And
Hmm.
it reminded me of something I heard at the very beginning of one of your YouTube episodes about your YouTube videos about money. It was the John Davis quote. You all laugh at me because I'm different, but I laugh at you because you're all the same. And each one of these statements is, we could say that, right? Like somebody might push back and laugh at it, but it's because everybody's doing these things. So I'm curious about what you'd say about this. So number one, you're not going to find these very provocative, by the way. This is a quote. Most of our financial troubles are not based in need, but in cultural expectations. And
Hmm.
we were just talking about that a little bit, but can you give me a couple examples, or at least an example of when that was most clear in your life?
So I shared the story, maybe just because it was on the top of my mind, but again, I've maybe made a dozen trips to like developing nations, like the poorest of the poor in the poorest of the places that you can find, and found people who were happy, people who were
Mm, mm,
on some levels even more generous than Americans, like had nothing and yet still wanted to give you something.
mhm,
Very interesting. And I would typically take high school or young adults on these trips. We were building schools or building homes or working with the church or whatever it would have been. And inevitably, we would spend time in these poor places. And at the end of the trip, someone would always talk about how blessed they are to have so much stuff back home. They
hmm,
would they would make two comments. They would comment about how incredibly happy
mm,
everybody was and how happy they were to have all this stuff back home. Um, and even this was before even discovering minimalism in my life, like just really struggling with that disconnect of are all these things making us happy? Is money making us more happy, or is it actually taking away our relationships with others and connections with others? Like you just learn to rely on other people. You have much deeper relationships when you don't drive into
mhm,
your own garage and turn on the television every evening. So certainly that would have been a part of it. And then started writing about minimalism, and hey, we've all got bigger houses than even our grandparents had. We've got way more stuff than anyone has ever had in human history. Like we don't want more money because we need more stuff. Like we all to a great extent have enough clothes. We have a roof over our head. Like we've got freezers and pantries full of food. Like we have what we need. We just want more money because the internet influencer seems to be living a happier life with more money than we do, and so
mm.
it's probably where that thought
Yeah,
came from. And it's a very
yeah,
freeing thought when you can get there. Like I have enough. I have enough money coming in. I have enough stuff around me. I don't have to live my life thinking that clamoring for more and more all the time.
yeah. Yeah, it's so I'm just thinking of like I'm almost always thinking visually, and just thinking of like this idea of need. And we almost always say need versus want, but I like the clarity you put around it. Need versus cultural expectation. Okay, well, let me get you to the next provocative opinion. Um, I'm about to buy a new car, like a new car. I'm going to, this is actually true. This is why I picked it. Here was a never carry a car payment. That was a quote. You said, we've never owned a car that would turn heads in traffic, but we've also never felt the stress or regret over a car purchase. Um, I have believed that my whole life. Like, you're crazy to buy new cars. And then every time I go to buy a car, I look at the difference between, like, if I'm going to go buy a new Toyota, right? The difference between one with 10,000 or 15,000 miles and one with no miles is actually kind of small. And the ability to get exactly what I want, so that I believe this will be true. I believe I'll be looking out the window 10 years from now and that car will still be there. So tell me if there's anything wrong in my thinking around the best way to have an old car that I've driven forever is to buy a new one and keep it forever. Is there something fundamentally wrong with my thinking?
There's not anything fundamentally wrong with your thinking.
Don't let me off the
Um,
hook.
the well, no, the quote isn't necessarily about new versus old. Well, what is the specific phrasing? The quote is about just never carrying a car payment.
And there was
Um,
this bit about turn heads in traffic, which I think is a slightly
oh,
different
yeah, that
conversation,
was more like I
like
buy Honda
fanciness. Yeah,
Accords,
yeah, yeah,
so
yeah,
so it's
yeah.
never. I mean, a Honda
Right,
Accord's a Honda Accord. It's a great car. It's going to drive a long time. It's just not never going
right.
to turn ahead.
Yeah.
Um, uh, a lot changed during COVID. Like
Hmm.
legitimately, like used cars.
Interesting, right?
The prices of used cars compared to new cars changed. Like we bought our first new car in 2021, and it was the same math that you were doing. It was like, wait, for just this much more? Like, why would
Yeah,
I? Because we
yeah.
always bought like 3 or 4 year old cars, and we drive them for 10 years. Um, and I'm like, well, the math just doesn't make sense because the price of used cars
Okay.
went up so much. So, so I'm not letting you off the hook. Like it's legitimately for me. It was more. It was just great advice that I got. Hey,
Yeah.
rather than buying an expensive car and making the payments, like buy the car that you can with the cash that you
Hmm.
have,
So that's a
and then
separate.
just yeah, and then pay yourself with the car payment. Like rather than spending
Right,
$350 a month, like
right.
just put it in a bank account. And then when that car, which isn't going to last 20 years, but is going to last, whatever it might be, 3 or 4 or 5 or
Yeah,
6, then you will have saved up enough to buy a little nicer car than you had before. And so that's what we've done.
yeah.
Really my
Love it.
my entire life, and it worked out. And granted, um like my wife rather than my wife got a full ride scholarship to college, and so her parents bought her a car as her graduation gift because they didn't have to pay for college. And so I guess we started out with it was a used car, but we started out with a
Yeah,
car. So like our very first one wasn't how are we
yeah,
going to get into our very first car? So I should mention that. But yeah, I mean, we've
yeah,
never driven very fancy cars. It'll be interesting, Carl, and I hope it works out for you. Like it'll be interesting to buy a new car and see if you drive it for 10 years.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
because it's like once you upgrade your life, it becomes tough to not do it. And to not.
no, it
I think
is.
we could. I
It is
think it's time to get
interesting.
back into a new car. 5 or 6 years down the road. But
It's for me, they're very much a tool for the activities I do. So like getting deep in the mountains and getting deep in the desert in southern Utah. And so I'm selling an F-150 that I bought, and I said I would keep that for 15 years. Now, I'm not selling it because I want something new. I'm selling it because functionally it doesn't do the job the way I had hoped it would do. So that's at least a cute story I'm telling myself, right? Like, so
hmm
I'm really interested to see what cute story comes up 5 or 6 years from now, and to see if it's the same. You know?
great, like just amazing financial advice I got from someone else. A financial planner told me the three things that cause most people to go into debt are: number one, they buy too much house, they buy too much car, or they pay for too much entertainment.
Mm,
He said over and over again, those are the three things that I see get people into trouble. And so
interesting.
avoiding the
Yeah.
car payment, I think, is really, really helpful advice for people. And countercultural. It's super countercultural. There's so many people. Like it's almost expected that
So
people are going
for
to
sure,
have
it's like
a car payment.
it's like your electricity bill. It's just a subscription, right?
Yeah.
Of
Right.
course.
Yeah.
Yeah, really interesting. I guess I'm double whammy then, because my car largely is my entertainment. Like it gets me to the things that I do as a hobby. So I'm gonna have to be careful.
I mean, entertainment's eating out and
Sure.
trips and a restaurant, and concerts, and it's right. People spend a lot of money in that.
Yeah, it's funny because and it is really interesting because a lot of people have the same truck that I have and never use it ever. And I use it for the thing it was designed for. And so it Yeah, it's just interesting. It's so
Mhm.
what's so interesting to me is the stories we can tell ourselves.
Mhm. Oh,
Okay,
yeah.
number 3. I'm curious about this one. So this is the third Joshua's 3 most provocative opinions. Number 3, the spender should manage the family
Oh.
finances.
Mhm. Mhm.
Talk to me about
Mhm.
that.
Yeah. People don't like that one.
I mean, it is why it came up. The whole creative team here was like, we got to understand this.
So I can see how it might backfire. For us, that was a very significant, a very specific period of time. Granted, it was our first 15, 17 years of marriage, although my wife still handles all the finances. But I made $15,000 a year our first year of marriage, and then years two
Mm.
through seven, I made $33,000 a year, and so there was never a lot of money coming in. And putting Kim, um, again, I was the saver, like that, who I always was. Kim wasn't that way, although she was never a huge overspender. But putting her in charge of, hey, here's how much money's in the bank. Here's what our credit card statements are every single month. Here's what the mortgage payment is. Like it helped her. Granted, she has great discipline, but for her to be able to see the financial picture of, no, actually, Joshua isn't just saying we don't have the money. Like we don't actually have the money. And so she still does that. And granted, life has changed a lot since 15 years of ministry and first 2 or 3 years on my own. But yeah, for us, it worked out. And like the first pushback I got from somebody was like, if the spender knew how much money we had, that she would be buying more stuff. And
Right,
I'm
right.
like, okay, I guess I can see how that would work the other way if you have tons of money in the bank. But for us struggling to get by and to not carry any credit card debt, it was helpful for her to see the specific numbers.
Yeah, it's interesting how often I've seen that too. And remember working with clients where, you know, he was just so would never stop spending, right? And his in this case, the clients of the two clients, right? The female spouse was the breadwinner and the saver, the primary breadwinner, and
Mhm.
the husband in this case was um in this case really creative and sort of always doing creative things and felt that way, felt that applied to money too, like easy come easy go, let's go. And it's that's actually true. Like there was largely a sense of lack of responsibility because he didn't know, and it was easy to absolve himself from the involvement. Like I've actually kind of done that myself. I got fired. My our family's financial planner and my wife fired me. They're like, you don't need to attend the meetings anymore. Like it they actually told me, my financial planner, which has read all my books, started quoting me. And she said something like, it's hilarious that you thought you were the best person for this job. Like the like being the financial planner for your house. It's hilarious that you thought that. And so they fired me, but I have noticed that sometimes I'm a little less disciplined in spending because I'm not quite as actively involved as I used to be. I love not being involved, but it allows me to absolve myself of a little responsibility because I can be like, "Oh, I didn't know. I like you guys are in charge."
Mhm.
So it's that's a really interesting rule. Um how would you we've talked a bit about it, but I'm sort of curious to hear you specifically. Like how would you define enough personally?
Enough is, I get to do the work that I want to bring into the world, would be would be enough.
Mm.
Not not a dollar amount, although I run a business with employees, and so there is a dollar amount that I know we need each month to get to keep doing what I'm doing. Um, but if I get to do that and it provides for my family, then I think that's enough. If I'm like I feel like I'm supposed to be helping people own less, but that doesn't pay all the bills. And so I have a second job, um, and I have to be doing that, which is taking away from opportunity that I could be doing over here. Like, I think that would be, I'm not making enough in doing that thing that I
Mm.
feel called to do and bring into the world. That's a good question.
No, I love that. You've mentioned a daughter just going off for college. Is it safe to assume she's around 20?
Uh, yeah, 18 and a half.
Oh, 18. Okay, 18. Um, let's just pretend, as a final question, let's just pretend like 20 years from now, I'm still doing this show and we have your 39-year-old daughter on, and I ask her, what does money mean to you? What would you hope she would say?
What does money mean to you? I hope that she would answer similarly to what how how we started this conversation, that
Mm,
money provides for our needs, but it is not the most important thing to me. Um,
mm,
Faith is important, relationships are important, the work I bring into the world is important, and money makes that possible. There's an intersection there between those three. But if money is the thing that I want the most, or money is the thing that I never feel never feel like I have enough of, and it consumes my time and activities and passion and attention, then I would not want her to say that about that. I would say
mm,
it's a part of my life, but it's not the main driver for my life.
mm.
Nor does it um, drive my decisions. I never chose a career because of how much money I would make from it. So I hope that she's doing a job that she loves, that she finds fulfillment in, and that it provides for her needs.
Mm. Joshua, that's amazing. Thanks for taking the time to chat today.
Thanks for having me. This is great. Super
Yeah.
enjoyable.
50 Fires is a production of Blind Nil Audio in association with The Roost. I'm looking forward to our next conversation around the fire. Cheers, my friends.
The views, information, or opinions expressed in the series are solely those of the individuals involved and do not necessarily represent those of Chip and Joanna Gaines, Blind Nil Audio, nor Magnolia.